For June 29th. I'm your host, David Michalek, and with me today is America's #1 credit expert, John Ulzheimer, formerly of Equifax and FICO. And here we are again, John, to do another Q&A session. And let me just, all right, so you're going to hear a little bit of, I just have to set this real quick. See, when I did the intros, I didn't have to do this, but I have to do this now. I had like a few minutes. Okay, there we go. All right, perfect.
There we go.
Okay, so yeah, we're starting to see some people jump on, and if you're just joining, thank you very much. So on today's Q&A lives, we spend hopefully the most of the live answering your questions live, and talking about credit. And until we get our first question, of course, Mike is going to be the first one.
I
Yeah,
had the
Mike, we're doing
same
little things.
question.
We're doing, yeah. Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting. Like I did this last week. So when I walk into the office, we have a pretty big office here, and people haven't seen me for a while. Like they do the same take that you did, John. Like, whoa, who is that guy? So yeah, it'll take me probably about three. Oh no, probably about 6 weeks to get back to where I was before with the beard. All right, but Mike, thank you for noticing. um, so before we got on, John and I were talking about John's new what's the word, foray into TikTok. And I watched a couple of your videos, and so I got on there myself. I'm like, yeah, this could be. I did looked at some stats, and TikTok is really, oh my gosh. I mean, it looks like it's even bigger than Facebook as far as greetings go, as far as viewers go. Derek, welcome. Good to have you. So in fact, John, I think we're going to do this in reverse order. Um, One of the things that I saw on there for as long as I could stomach it. Hey, Henry, good to have you. Um, is I started going through like credit advice, and I just knew it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be really bad, scammy stuff. I mean, you and I are not going to be surprised at this. This is everywhere. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. So I thought I would go through and just see what was there. And sure enough, it was my one of my worst nightmares. It's actually, John, worse than inquiries. It was worse than inquiries. It was how to get stuff deleted from your credit report by getting rid of your old addresses. I mean, that was video after video after video, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, people, how bad is this going to get?" And there was one video that had, what was it, like 26,000 views, and somebody is going into their Experian account, and this is how you remove your address, and your addresses are linked to your credit account. So John, we got to talk about that, because that I
Sure.
I was mortified those were the top credit. I'm looking at credit education, credit repair stuff, because that's going to be my side of it anyway, and it was horrible, horrible. So maybe you
Yeah,
can
I
you can
the so
clear
the
that up for everybody.
so I was at an event, and by the way, David, I never pimp my own social media sites on these Facebook lives with you, but yes, I am trying to build my TikTok. I'm embarrassed to say this. I'm trying to build my TikTok following. I mean, who if you'd have told me 20 years that was going to come out of my mouth, then I would have said you were crazy. But I am trying to build the TikTok following. There are You're right. I mean, it is I think the largest social media um,
Yeah.
outlet in the world. I
Oh,
think.
and John, I'm perfectly happy to have you
Yeah,
present your TikTok page. I mean, this is all about credit education, and everybody who's
yeah,
watching, if you want to go follow John on TikTok, please do.
yeah. And it's not hard. It's not hard to find me, I guess, and then
No.
follow. But the difference between TikTok and everything else that I do. I'll give you an example. You and I will be on for 45 minutes tonight. The videos that I do for you are around 5 to 6 minutes, depending on the topic. Some
Yeah.
are longer, some are shorter. The videos that I've done for other clients are all around 5 or 6 minute bites at the
Yeah.
apple. TikTok, 15 seconds or 60 seconds, or I think there's a 3 minute option. So you it and you've you have probably known me long enough and have heard me speak long enough to know I have a real hard time with that. I um, in a deposition, you're supposed to give the shortest truthful answer, STA, shortest truthful answer. But
Hmm.
when I talk about this type of stuff, if you ask me a question, I try to give the most in-depth answer I possibly can give, so
Yeah.
I don't leave anything out there, and I don't miss something, and that's really hard because you're restricted. It's like Twitter; you're restricted to whatever
Yeah. There's a
the
certain amount
box
of characters,
is.
right?
Yeah, a certain amount of characters. So you really have to be creative with your message and get it across fast. The good thing about, I guess, good thing about TikTok is you can have text appear above you, and
Hmm.
you can have other stuff above you the whole time as well. So yeah, I mean, if you wanna follow me, that's great. But you're going to see a bunch of 30 or 15-second and 60-second small bites. But they will be correct. I'm not going to be given any garbage about how to,
Yeah.
file fake FTC identity theft reports and lie to the CFPB or any of that baloney. So if that's
You're
what you're interested in, you're not don't follow me. But if you're interested
you're
in the
gonna see
small bites, then
you're gonna
please
see
do.
John break down the FICO chart using potatoes.
That dinner potatoes, I did. I was
That
chopping
was
up dinner
great.
potatoes,
I
and I'm
loved
like,
it.
this
That
is
was great.
perfect. This is perfect. I got my wife to video record it, and I broke it down I can't wait to actually order a pizza, and I can slice off 10% of the pizza and 15% of the pizza and 35%
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
pizza, and, you know. But yeah, I the issue with addresses, it's one of those things that a little bit of truth all of a sudden morphs into a gigantic myth, right? Um,
yeah,
the issue, so addresses make it to your credit reports a variety of ways. One of the ways is that you can add addresses to your credit reports. The credit bureaus can find addresses for you. There's really no shortage of places to find addresses. Accurate is a source of addresses. Certainly, LexisNexis is a source of addresses, and
yeah,
your creditors are a source of addresses. And so, if you have a credit card with, Joe's Bank, and Joe's Bank is furnishing your credit card account to the credit bureaus every single month while it's open and active, they're also furnishing information about your personal information. So your name, address, social, date of birth, things like that. And so that's also a way that addresses make it to a consumer's credit report. Whenever we talk about fraud and what is the credit report byproduct of fraud, one of the things we always talk about for people to look for addresses where you've never lived. And because it's
yeah.
possible that an inquiry or a new account opening resulted in this fraudulent address or this non-authentic address being added to your credit report, and of course you want to get that removed because it's incorrect. Well, it's kind of blossomed into um, this other kind of tangential universe where people now think, wait a minute, there must be some sort of an anchoring mechanism to your account information from your addresses, and that's not really true. And so the theory has now grown, and it's kind of sprouted its own reality that, well, if you have addresses removed from your credit reports, then somehow it's easier to get derogatory entries removed from your credit reports. Well, let me kind of pop that bubble right now. If you honestly think that addresses are the only reason why derogatory information is on your credit report, and it's really that easy to get derogatory information removed by just getting some addresses removed, I, I, I'm sorry, but that's just simply not true. The credit reporting agencies, it's called matching logic. Their matching logic is, and I've got to be careful how far I go with this because I'm familiar with it, but it's also not public. But I think it is public that the credit bureaus use very sophisticated matching logic to associate information in their credit file system with you, the consumer. And there are literally thousands of permutations of information that the credit bureaus use to
Mm,
associate
yeah.
information in their credit file database with you. Removing the address is immaterial. But look, fine. If you want to get all your old addresses off your credit report, if you're OCD about that, then go for it. But please don't think that by paying some company for that advice that it's going to somehow lead to a magical kind of sweeping of information off of your credit reports.
Well, the supposition, John, and the claim from what I've always heard for almost a decade now is that if you remove the addresses, the addresses are connected to your accounts, and somehow that aids you in the dispute process.
Yeah.
Is the claim?
Yeah, the problem is that when you file a dispute with a credit bureau and the credit bureau sends a dispute form to the furnisher, it has all of your addresses, not just your former address, your second former address. It has your current address. It also has your name, your middle initial, your last name, any generational suffix, your date of birth, your social security number. It
Yeah.
has everything about you. And so what if you remove your address? You can't change, you're not going to change your name, you're not going to change your social, you can't change your date of birth, and you can't delete all of the addresses off your credit report. So there's some connectivity that still remains, even if you were to remove one of the variety of information from your credit reports. But look, this is why we do these, David, and this is why I do
Hmm.
my little 15-second TikTok snippets, is to try to dispel garbage like that. And we have
Yeah.
7 people. We have 7 people watching right now. There's 7 people now that hopefully aren't going to fall for any of that baloney that they see. Or I see that Mike has commented that I guess someone actually reached out to him trying to sell some sort of an idea to him. And so to the extent that we're saving some people from wasting their money
Right.
on that kind of baloney, then for me, it's time well spent.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've always said, John, and I bring it up on this Facebook Live, is that if we were talking about some magical method to remove stuff or jump people's credit scores up 100 points, I mean, we would have thousands and thousands of views in a day. But the fact of the matter is, the truth is highly valuable, but it's not as salacious. It's just not going to sell. You're not going to put it on a cover of any ad copy that's going to bring a lot of attention to it, because it's really simple, common sense stuff. Like, one thing you said that I thought made so much sense that it was actually kind of laughable was that you said, hey, listen, this is when we talked about addresses and removing addresses and what it really does before. And you said, well, think about it for a second. If it was that easy, if you could disconnect yourself from credit items by simply changing your address, well, what would happen if you moved, and let's say we're talking about a woman who changed her name? Well, what if all of her credit was good? Does that mean all of her good credit would just somehow be questionable or drop off or disappear? That would be a tragic thing. So
That's
why
right.
would you believe that you can disassociate yourself from derogatory credit just by simply changing an address, which is obviously not even something that's possible.
That's right. And again, if you think that by relocating or going out to a FedEx Kinko's or a UPS store and renting one of their little post office boxes and then changing your address to that versus what your actual physical, if you really honestly think that that's going to somehow help your credit, then go do it. Adults get to make adult decisions and spend their money as they choose to spend their money. But I'm just telling you, you can believe me or not believe me, but look at the places where I worked. It's not like I'm making this crap up because I read a book that someone
Hmm.
wrote. That's not going to allow you to escape from your credit past.
Yeah. Cliff's got a question. After you have your personal information corrected, probably how long before you should see the changes to your credit report? So I'm assuming, Cliff, that if you're wanting to, like John was mentioning earlier, hey, maybe you want to just clean up your personal identifying information section. That's the PII section. That's got your name variations, old addresses, and date of birth, and so forth. So forth. How long does it take, John? I think he's asking for those corrections to be made.
Yeah, those, again, if you're disputing information on your credit report, the bureaus have 30 days to respond. Addresses don't require any sort of third party, meaning that they're not going to send any sort of dispute form to a bank or a collector or a credit union. When you do that, the bureaus generally will just remove addresses if you ask them to do so.
Excellent. Monswell is back. Good to see you.
Man,
Oh,
you have no idea how much you missed.
yes. Well, Aaron's back and says, "What do you guys?" Here we go. What do you guys think about the upcoming recession's effect on the credit world?
What a great topic.
I know. You know what? If you had been here last week, last Wednesday, we spent the entire session talking about that. So I don't know if it merits covering it again, but Aaron, if you want to go back to last week's and and watch that one. John and I really talked a lot about that, especially
Right.
with personal experiences, mostly on my side as far as how tragic it can be. But yeah, great question. All right, so John, we have a couple of things I wanted to cover today. And by the way, for those people watching, feel free to ask a question if you got something in mind. Happy to answer it for you. So John, usually I like to base some of our, at least a portion of the Facebook lives that we do and YouTube lives that we do on some of the questions that I got during the week, and I had a really good interaction with a client, just back and forth on our messaging, on our Facebook messaging, asking me about paying off a charge off. Should I pay off a charge off? What's the downside of paying off a charge off? And of course, I know you know what my opinion is on that, but one of the things that he is concerned about, and that a lot of people are concerned about. This is just a natural position to be in, probably from the bad information that they're getting, but I don't want to spoil the answer you're about to give. But the concern is, hey, what happens if I pay this charge off? Is it going to reset to 7 years? Am I stuck with it for 7 years? And so let's talk about the positives and if there are any negatives of paying a charge off account, not a collection, but a charge off from the original creditor.
Sure. So if you, first off, you'll never, and I have been doing media and writing blogs for the better part of the last 2 decades. I defy any of y'all to go find any place where I've said don't pay what you owe, because you're not. I've saved you the time. You're not going to find it, because if you owe someone money, you should pay them what you owe them.
Exactly.
Um, so if you owe a lender money and it is charged off and you have the ability to pay them, then you should pay them. Um, Once you pay them, then the balance on the account should be updated on your credit report to indicate that it is now paid, and there is an actual Metro 2 code paid charge off that the furnisher can now use to update the account, and now will indicate that it's a paid charge off rather than an unpaid charge off, and the balance will be zero instead of something greater than zero. Um, so here's all the good stuff that comes out of doing that. Number one is hopefully you sleep better at night knowing that you lived up to your end of the bargain, right? Number two, your credit reports have been updated and they look more favorably. Number three, you know that the creditor is not going to sell the debt to a debt buyer, and therefore it's not going to kind of live this second zombie life, if you will.
Yep.
Number four, the creditor is not going to sue you because they've already been paid and there is no need to sue you. So you have all these great things, all in the form of bad things not happening. Now, that it's a very, very valid concern about this whole 7 year. That I get this question a lot, and the um, the I guess the perception or is that if you do something that causes any sort of activity on that account, then the allowable time frame or the anchor date of the particular account can be reset to something more recent, and therefore restart the clock of credit reporting, and therefore you're now going to have to live with a paid charge off for 7 years rather than living with an unpaid charge off for some period of time less than 7 years. Then when it's deleted, it's gone. So here's the good news. It There's nothing you can do to reset that clock. Nothing. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is what defines that clock, not the credit bureau's policies, not John Ulzheimer, not FICO, nothing. The Fair Credit Reporting Act is the authority there. And of course, that's based, the FCRA is a statute. So this is a law, not a policy. The Fair Credit Reporting Act indicates that when an account goes to a collection or default status, that there is this obsolescence period that begins, and that obsolescence period is 7 years, meaning that the credit bureaus have to remove it no later than 7 years after the date of the first delinquency that led to the terminal status, like collection or charge off. There's no language in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that indicates that that date can change or be modified or redefined as some date where you have made a payment on a collection or made a payment on a charged off account or settled it or disputed it. It doesn't exist. So you can pay it, you can settle it, you can dispute it, you can do whatever you want to do, and it will not change the date from which it has to be removed. Nothing. Now, here's where I think the myth comes from. I think people sometimes confuse the credit reporting statute of limitations with the ability for a creditor to sue you statute
Hmm.
of limitations. And so you may have heard the term time barred debt. If you've never heard of
Sure.
that term before, Google it, time barred debt. And what time barred debt is it's debt that is so old that the creditor cannot sue you to collect it. They can still send you letters. They can still, hound you. If it's less than 7 years, they can still credit report it, but they can no longer sue you to collect the debt. And the time barred debt statutes vary by state. So there are some
Yeah.
states where after 3 years they can't sue you. There are some states, I
Right.
think as long as 12 or 15 years, they
Hmm.
can still sue you. And then all the other states are in between
Yeah.
those time frames. So that is completely independent and separate from the credit reporting. The credit reporting is 7 years and 7 years and 7 years, and that's it. Um, the time bar debt stuff, there is some language in some of the states' statutes that define when a debt becomes time barred that allows that date to be reset if you make a
Right.
payment on something or if you commit to make a payment. And that's why sometimes you'll see debt collectors and debt buyers ask people to make kind of a goodwill payment of $5,
Yeah.
$10, $20, $50, something really, really small. And it's a little bit sneaky. The
Right.
the reason they're doing that isn't so much to get you to pay them a bunch of money. I think it's to get the debt it's called re-aging, but it's not re-aging in a credit reporting context. It's
Yeah.
re-aging in a time barred debt context. So now
Yeah.
it's technically, this that clock that starts ticking to make it time barred. That's the clock that resets. But again, that has nothing to do with credit reporting.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right. That's the confusion that takes place a lot of the time is the difference between what is happening on a credit report versus what a collection company might do to get additional leverage on you by making that small payment.
That's right.
Especially if they intend to file a lawsuit, if that's just their nature, if that's their business model, or if the dollar amount is sizable enough.
That's right.
But yeah, but I've heard reps from collection companies say that before, that
Yeah.
this is the real reason why that good faith payment. Hey, just show us that you're serious so we can work with you. Give us $5 or $10. That's not a good faith gesture. That's so they can have a little bit more leverage in case they need it.
Yeah.
So
If you're gonna pay a debt collector, remember, because the debt collector is not your creditor. The debt collector has been assigned the debt by the creditor to collect it. Now, if it's a debt buyer and the debt buyer has purchased it, that's a different animal. They're now the new creditor. But they didn't buy it dollar for dollar. So if you defaulted on a $10,000 debt and the original creditor sold the debt buyer didn't pay $10,000 to acquire that debt. They paid some amount very, very small relative to the original amount because they probably bought a gigantic book of defaulted debts, 100 million, 100, 500 million, a billion, whatever,
mhm.
of defaulted debts. And they probably paid a very, very small amount on the dollar. And now they own your debt and they can try to collect it from you. Now, in those scenarios, I do advise people to try to settle those debts. And the reason I advise that is
Yeah.
because the original creditor has washed their hands of it. They're not your creditor anymore, so they're not going to accept payment from you. The debt buyer is now your new creditor, but they didn't pay the full amount to acquire that debt. So even if you only paid 75% of what you owe or 50% of what you owe, they're still making a massive profit because they paid such a small amount to acquire that debt. And so in those scenarios, it is a smart financial move to settle the debt with your new creditor. So I would, if you're going to pay them anything and they are the new creditor, I would advise you just to go ahead and bite the bullet and settle the debt with them, because then if you settle it, the
Mhm.
balance is now technically zero and there is no reason to sue you. So it doesn't really matter if it's time barred debt or not time barred debt. You don't owe them any more money. And so there is no point to come after you any longer.
Juan, welcome. Hello. Mike, thanks for debunking the bull. That's
Yeah.
what we do on this show.
Yeah, if it's look,
Um,
if it smells like bologna, it probably is bologna. And if you David, if you read Mike's full comment string, you'll see what's happening here. If y'all are being
yeah, I saw.
pursued by other companies who are watching these videos, I don't know. You tell me. it if I would hope that smart people can see through the thin veneer of baloney. And if you've got people chasing you down and trying to sell you certain things, and I don't know, a good product tends to sell itself, and it doesn't need kind of a sneaky sales tactic like that. And yes, I said that. And so, just keep that in mind as people are chasing you down trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah, as a side note, Mike, I saw this that video that John and I did. Well, actually, it was me, John, and also another gentleman from Steve Rieger. He used to largely run the dispute department for TransUnion on the West Coast. Yeah, we spent a little time going over really debunking Metro 2, the Metro 2 compliance stuff, and what a it's like we smacked a hornet's nest with that. There were a lot of people not happy with that whole thing. But again, they kind of attacked us verbally. But what are you going to say? I mean, it was a bunch of nonsense anyway, and a lot of people love that video and were really appreciative of that video. But listen, that's kind of how this stuff unfolds. We get out there and give people real accurate stuff so they can help themselves. Cornell Mann, how do you answer the lawsuit? That's not really much of a context, Cornell. Are you saying you've been served? If that's the case, then maybe put a little bit more information in that.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
if you got a question,
if you've been sued, yeah, if you've been sued by anybody, whether it's a debt buyer, debt collector, a neighbor, if you've been sued by anybody, you've got to respond. And usually you have 30 days to respond. And most of the time that means hiring an attorney, or if you're knowledgeable on the law, you can respond what's called pro se or pro per, which means that you're representing yourself as the lawyer. But you have to respond. If you don't respond, then you're likely going to lose by default. And if you
yeah,
lose by default, then whoever sued you now they now have a judgment. And so depending on the style of the lawsuit, if it's a monetary relief that they're seeking, then they may now have a money judgment against you. So you don't want to ignore those, because ignoring them isn't gonna. And this is one of the things I always tell people: you can ignore your creditor, you can ignore the debt collector, you can even tell the debt collector never to contact you again,
yeah,
and they have to comply. But when you're served, when the process server serves you with lawsuit paperwork, you can't ignore that. And if you do ignore that, you're going to lose by default. And the next thing you may get is a phone call from your human resources department letting you know that your wages have been garnished and that part of your paycheck now has to go to pay this money judgment. Because I forget what it's called. I think a writ of sequestration. I think in English that's referred to as a wage garnishment. So
mm,
there comes a time where sticking your head in the sand and ignoring this stuff simply just isn't a strategy any longer. And you do have to deal with it. And now things are terrible, especially if your wages are being garnished, because now your employer knows about it, right? And you probably didn't want your employer
yeah.
to know about it in the first place. And now your paychecks are smaller, so it's always better to deal with it on the front end of the curve and not force, especially if it's a large amount of money. You think that they're just going to forget about the $10,000 you owe them? Negative. They're going to figure out a way to force you to pay it. So it's always a better idea to deal with this kind of stuff on the front end, because that's when your adversary is the friendliest. If you just ignore them and ignore them and ignore them, you're going to force them to do things that tend to become more kind of legal and regimented in nature.
Cornell, just to add a little bit more to this, and John, I'm sure you know this, but this is kind of a cottage industry for a lot of people in the debt collection spaces. They'll buy these debts. They'll make sure it's within the time where they're allowed to sue you. It's escaping me right now. It's the statute of limitations. And then what they do is they'll serve you. Sometimes if they can't find you, they'll serve you via publication, and they'll get a default judgment. And they know you're not going to show up. I think, John, they have to just demonstrate to the court. I mean, you might know this a little bit better than me, that they've made an attempt to find you or made an attempt to serve you, and then they can notify you via publication. So they can put an ad in some obscure periodical and or publication somewhere and say, hey, we're trying to reach such and such about this kind of a debt, or not exactly sure the language, and they can go to the court and say, well, look, hey, we even put it in print, and we can't find the person, and then right there, the court will a lot of times give them a default judgment. And I don't know, John, if we talked about this in one of the seminars, but there was a rental company that would rent furniture, rent TVs, rent all kinds of stuff to people with horrible credit scores. Like, well, where's the business model in that? Well, what they ended up doing is selling that debt off to their legal side, and they would get default judgments against people, and that's where all the money was. So Cornell, like what John was saying, is exactly, you can ignore all this stuff, but once that, if you don't appear, if you don't respond, they'll get a judgment, and now you have no options. That's
Yep.
levies on your bank account, wages garnished. Let's see. Okay, so Juan, I saw your question. I won't put it up here. It's more of like a credit repair, credit Versio question. This is mostly credit education today. But that's not uncommon for TransUnion. Your follow up is going to be the frivolous dispute response. It's right there in your tutorials. It's in round two. Just look at the drop down menu. It's frivolous dispute. And if you have any questions, just email support@creditversio.com, and Travis will give you some more details on that. Okay, let's see. Can we request the amount that the collection agency paid for the debt?
Yeah. So just for clarity, and that's a fair question.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Yeah, it's a fair question. So just to be clear, Cornell, I just want to make sure that I didn't mislead you in any way. So a collection agency isn't the creditor, right? A collection agency is quote unquote working the debt for some original creditor, whether that's a doctor's office, a credit card issuer, an apartment complex where you may have defaulted on a lease. So there's still an original creditor out there somewhere that owns the debt, and they have just consigned the collection activity to the third party debt collector or collection agency. The collection agency in that scenario does not own the debt. They're just trying to collect it. And in exchange for collecting it, they're paid a share of whatever amount it is that they're able to collect. And that's based on their contract with the original creditor, maybe 20%, 50%, whatever. And so when they collect monies from the consumer, they keep a portion of it and then give the rest of it back to the original creditor. In the scenario that we were talking about where the purchase was made, that's in a debt buyer scenario. So, let's say John Ulzheimer has a debt buyer company, and I have billions and billions of dollars at my disposal, and I go to the large credit card issuers and I tell them, hey, I want to buy, $500 million of defaulted credit card debt that's less than 24 months old, and I'm going to pay you 10 cents on the dollar. And they may say, yeah, sure. Or they may say, no, we want 12 cents on the dollar, whatever. So there's this back and forth negotiation. And if the answer is, yeah, well, let's do a deal, then I will buy all this debt from them. And then in the process of doing so, I am now your creditor. The credit card issuers were your creditor. You didn't pay them. They gave up on you. Now I am your creditor. And so now I either am going to sue you because I may have a collection attorney that works for me, or I may have a partnership with a collection agency and I may consign my debt to the collection agency just like the original creditor would have consigned the debt. So that's generally how the process works in a debt buyer scenario. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but you got the broad strokes. Those are the broad strokes. The amount that is paid for the debt is not something that it's on a credit report, and it's definitely not something that's part of any sort of FDCPA disclosures to a consumer. You could certainly ask, hey, how much did y'all pay for this? Or how much did the debt buyer pay for this? It's highly unlikely you're going to get an answer because that kind of puts you in a more powerful position if you know that your $10,000 debt was acquired for $500 by the debt buyer. Then why in the world would you offer them $10,000 or $5,000 to settle it? Because they're making a massive margin. I think what the takeaway is from this discussion is debt collecting and debt buying is a really good business, right? Because if you're able to acquire something for 10 cents on the dollar and get someone to pay you 20 cents on the dollar, which is a great settlement. Can you imagine if you were a debt collector and you said, look, Mr. Smith, here's a $10,000 debt that you defaulted on, plus fees, plus interest. Pay me $2,000 and we'll get out of your life. And you're like, damn, that's not a bad deal. They
Yeah.
made bank on the margin because they didn't pay $2,000 for it. They paid considerably less than that. And you got out of paying $8,000 plus whatever the principal was on the debt. So you won, and the debt buyer certainly won. And really the only one that lost there was the original creditor. And that's part of the risk of being an original creditor, is that some percentage of people are going to default, which is why, you know, interest rates on credit cards are so much higher, because
Right.
it's a risky form of credit. There's nothing to repossess. They can't come take your car back. They can't come take your house back. They just have to sell it. And so that's why they charge the interest rates that they charge, is to kind of subsidize the risk of doing business in that more risky environment.
Yeah, that kind of default. I mean, John, I imagine you probably have more insight on in this, but I mean, the interest rates are what they are. Their fees are what they are because they have a reasonable insight as to what their default rate is likely to be. They know that from the credit scores. They know that from
That's
the
right.
clientele that they have. So
That's
I mean,
exactly
yeah, it's a baked in and factored loss that they have. And also, Cornell, I think it's just because I know people who work in this industry. A couple of things, but the person that you get on the phone with at a collection company is not at a level where they're going to know what that. Very likely not going to know what was paid for that debt. That's probably pretty high, much higher above their pay grade. And
right.
also too, what's that?
The debt collector isn't going to know what the debt buyer paid for, because the debt buyer is the creditor, not the debt collector. So the debt
No,
buyer,
I'm
yeah,
referring
who
to the
now,
debt. I'm referring to the debt buyer who bought
yeah,
bulk debt for 10, 20 cents on the dollar. What I'm saying is that the person who answers the phone is probably not going to have the answer to that
no,
question.
that's right. No,
And
no,
also,
no one's going to tell you their cost of goods, right? You
yeah,
can't go to a dealership and expect them to tell you how much Ford incurred in cost to build that Mustang, or what their fully loaded cost was to build
right.
that Chevy Tahoe, or whatever they make. No one is going to tell you that, right? So um, we don't know how much it costs for Tesla to build a Tesla. We know how much they cost to buy one, but we don't know how much it costs to build a Tesla, how much they paid for the rubber and the glass and the wiring and the
Mm.
um, and the distribution and the taxes and the manpower, woman power, person power. They're not going to tell you that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and one last thought on this, Cornell, if you're still watching, we're really covering this topic in depth, John. Um, this process of suing consumers, or collection companies suing consumers, is that's a serious business. One of my very good friends out here in Las Vegas, where I live, that's what he does. He's an attorney that works for a collection company, and all he does all day long is put together cases that he's going to go file, so that so that collection company is going to get most of the time. I never really asked him, but I've heard that most of the judgments that are rendered in collection cases, 70-80% of them are just no shows. They're just default
Right.
judgments. You
Their
couldn't
default
find you.
judgment.
You were Yeah. People ignored it, and the first they hear of it is one day they log into their online banking and they got a zero balance because that levy came through, and then on top of that, your bank will charge you a fee for that.
So I'm gonna push back a little bit. That's not the first time you heard about it. The first time you heard about it is when you got your first late notice from whoever the original creditor was. Whether
No,
that
I
was
mean the
your
first time you find out that you got sued or that you
right,
got a default judgment against you.
right. But you certainly knew that you didn't pay someone that you I may have been born in the morning, but it wasn't yesterday morning. You're never going to convince me that someone who has credit didn't know that they didn't make their payment, right? You got to pull the wool over someone else's eyes, not, but because that just isn't going to work with me.
Yeah, so there's been even when I went through my dark credit days, I'll tell you there were years there where I was very aware of the cloud looming above my head. So you might be surprised, but you shouldn't be that surprised. Okay, so I'm going to court. Okay, all right. Well, you know, I'm not an attorney. John's not an attorney. Um, but if I got sued by a creditor, if I got served, I'm just giving you my opinion. This is one man's opinion. I wouldn't go to court because I know that I would lose if I owed the money. I would be on the phone trying to make a deal real quick, like make a settlement. Like, okay, let's not go to court because now you got court costs and everything else that's involved in that. Man, unless you got a great case that's going to be better than theirs when it comes time to talk about what's owed, usually people lose this stuff. And again, I'm not an attorney, but every time I've had somebody tell me that they got served, I'm like, number one, talk to an attorney. Number two, settle, pay them, get it done and over with because you don't want a judgment. Do not want a judgment. I don't know, John. Anything to add to that, or are we pretty much done talking about?
No, no, no. I the best way to avoid dealing with lawsuits is to pay your bills on time, and then you never have to worry about lawsuits.
Yeah, too true. The simplest answer. Although people do have their tough times, that's for sure. All right. I guess the message here is just don't vanish. Don't make them chase you. Be proactive. Okay. And this is really off topic. Let me see what's our time here. Okay, we got a few more minutes. Um,
I'll try to TikTok through these next questions, 15 seconds each.
oh, I'd love to see you try to get some practice here. You're not going to do this in 15 seconds, but maybe 3 minutes. I was doing a little research, John. They said that now that you can go up to 10 minutes. I'm not sure how old that is, but 10 minutes I think is the longest now.
Okay.
Okay, John. Difference between because a lot of people mix together their credit report and their credit scores, so they don't really quite understand that there's actually different players involved. So maybe you might take a second and explain the difference between or the relationship between a credit bureau, or we also call it credit reporting agency, and say FICO and Vantage Score. What's the relationship between those two groups?
So a a credit report and a credit score are not the same thing. In fact, a credit score is not part of a credit report. It's an ancillary product that's sold with a credit report. So it's you know, the leather interior of your car. It's an option. You paid extra to have it, but you certainly didn't have to buy it. All right.
Case in
Um,
point, you can go to annualcreditreport.com and get a credit report, but you won't get credit scores.
that's right. Uh, the um, the so that's that. The interplay between FICO and the credit bureaus and Vantage Score is a little bit more complex. The three credit bureaus are three independent companies. Okay, they're not the same entity. They're three completely independent. They're Pepsi, Coke, and whatever other soft drink manufacturer you can think of. Vantage Score is a product of the three credit bureaus. Okay, so the Vantage Score credit score is collectively owned. I know Vantage Score Solutions is a separate company, but and they own the IP of the Vantage Score credit score. But essentially, in English, without complicating the issue, is Vantage Score is essentially a product of the three credit bureaus. They got together in 2000, well, prior to 2006, and worked together to build the Vantage Score credit score. FICO is a different animal. FICO is a completely independent and operating publicly traded company. They're not a division of the credit bureaus. They're not a division of the government. You can go buy shares in FICO. They're a publicly traded company, just like Amazon and Microsoft and Apple are publicly traded companies. FICO does not sell its scores to lenders, and people think I'm nuts when I tell them, "Well, how in the world? How can that be true?" FICO builds the scoring systems, and those scoring systems are hung at the credit reporting agencies. And the credit reporting agencies have a distribution agreement with FICO, whereby they are allowed to use FICO's scoring models and score their credit reports and then deliver those two things collectively to end users. So if you think about what does it take to calculate a credit score? You have to have two things. You have to have a scoring model and you have to have a credit report. And then you have to marry those two things together to gen a credit score. Well, FICO isn't a credit bureau. FICO doesn't have your credit report, right? They're a, I know they do a lot of other stuff, but what they're most well known for is their work in credit scoring systems. Equifax is not FICO, right? So they don't own the FICO scoring model. So they have to partner with FICO in order to be able to use their scoring models and marry those two things together and then deliver them to the end user, which is usually a bank or some sort of financial services company that's using it to make some sort of a decision. So that's kind of the interplay between the credit bureaus and FICO, which is different than the interplay between the credit bureaus and VantageScore. FICO and VantageScore, there is no interplay. They're competitors. They're Democrats, Republicans, Pepsi, Coke, Delta Airlines, United Airlines. They're in the same industry, but they don't work together because they're competitors.
Excellent. Great answer. Love it. All right, everybody who is here with me today, thank you very much for joining me. I think, John, that's going to be a wrap for us today.
Yep.
Great questions. Love it.
As usual. Great questions as usual.
As usual, yep. Okay, so Mary, you're kind of coming in at the end there. I see that you're posting on Facebook, so I'll swing back around and answer that for you, but we're going to call it a show today. John, thank you so much for contributing. I appreciate it. Great answers as always. Everybody, we will see you next Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.
Bye, y'all.